Well, hello back again here at Avatar FM. It's 5 p.m. Thursday, second day of the CPDP conference here, live from Maison de la Poste. We've listened to great content so far today. We've had great music by Alina Roth, also just now by Shoko Igarashi. Thank you very much. We can do an on-air applause for Shoko. That was great. Thank you. And we're going to move right over to our second content cluster today. We're gonna dive into spyware. I have two guests sitting in front of me, which are Roussey from Data Rights and Mia Vybranovska from the Economic Security Council of Ukraine. So, as I said, it's going to be about spyware, and they're going to continue, based also on the talk that Data Rights organized, a panel organized today, which was called Ban versus Regulation. That is the spyware question. So for the next 30 minutes, it's Lori and Mia. After, we're going to continue with some content as well. So stay tuned. If you're at home, lean back, listen in. If you're at the conference, join us here. I'll give it over to Mia and Lori. Take it away.
Well, I'm Mia. I'm actually really, really excited to be here. And I'm going to be starting out with what I do and why I'm here. So I work at the Economic Security Council of Ukraine, and recently I published a research on the commercial spyware market, and, well, more generally on the initiatives that are right now arising to curb the proliferation of spyware, of commercial spyware. And what we're seeing right now, what I saw during my research, is that the current regulation is actually built on only a, visible part of a much, much larger ecosystem of spyware. So in this research, it is actually set against the Baumann process and the question of its effectiveness when it comes to national security. And what I found is that 21 out of 31 commercial spyware vendors that we looked into in this research, they actually are not encompassed by Baumann process or any other initiative that is, intended to regulate spyware. And I believe this is a really interesting look at this, because the market itself and this portion of the market, even if this small portion of the market is not regulated and it's not encompassed by the initiative itself, how can you actually say that you're going to be regulating spyware? So that's more about what I did, and I have Lori with me. She's going to talk more about what we were talking about yesterday on the panel.
Thank you so much, Mia. And so at my end, this is a topic I've been looming around for some time. So in 2015 in France, we had terrorist attacks, and so as a result, the state passed a reform of intelligence powers, and I was with a group of people, and we sued the state to really go after all these rules and try to push some balancing with human rights. And long story short, it led us to work a lot on the emerging rules around whether or how intelligence services could actually use hacking tools to gather intelligence. One of the things that we also got was we realized that there was an absolute emptiness in terms of legality when it came to very old rules that said that everything on wireless could just be collected and used for intelligence purposes without any safeguards whatsoever. So we went to the Constitutional Court and we won, and this is very much how the whole adventure started. And so this was very intense. So after this, it really struck us how much there needed to be an organization that was working on this and doing litigation on these topics, because when you realize that everything can be surveilled on wireless waves and nobody is actually here to question it, then you realize that, okay, apparently there is a space where someone should be. So we then started to kind of build and think about how to create an organization. And while I was taking a break and working, being a data protection officer for a major humanitarian organization, and then when we were able to raise money, then we raised money, and then I left my job and started working for data rights. So now data rights is an EU-wide organization because, of course, we were doing litigation, and we thought because the EU now is fairly functional, there was no reason why we should focus on one state only, because actually you can get a great case in one country, and then it just helps for the rest of every country in the Union. So this is very much why we wanted to have then an EU focus. And so when you start an organization, you have to be fairly focused. And so I knew that there was a lot of work happening on spyware, and because of the research that I then did also at the Oxford Internet Institute on hacking by intelligence services and outsourcing the hacking, then it was very easy for us to hop on that train and think, okay, well, actually we can probably help with this. And we could, because a lot of people have ended up working on the topic just because there was the scandal in their country, and then they would have realized that people had been targeted and they needed to help these people, but they didn't really understand the technology behind it. So it's very easy for us to then jump in and help, and this is what we did. And so this is very much tied to the panel that happened yesterday, because what I did last year, we started talking with people that are supporting people that were targeted with Pegasus primarily, and they all felt that there needed to be a little bit more of an effort to work together as a group across the EU to really bring states and companies to accountability. And so I helped shape this, and so we created a coalition where we really tried to put together and pool some resources and some knowledge and to really have more of an impact. And so, yeah, maybe I can talk about the panel after, if you want to present a little bit more.
No, you can talk now if you want, but other than that,
okay.
I would take away.
So yesterday the panel was very much about a friction that I've noted. You know, that's the beauty when you work in the humanitarian sector. Everything is messy and broken, and so you think, okay, I don't have time for this. How do we fix this? And so it makes you a little bit intense because you're used to dealing with chaos and everything is urgent. But so yeah, when I arrived in this space, a lot of international organizations were calling for a ban. And yeah, they're international organizations. Of course, they're calling for a ban because they're having to talk for every countries. But the reality is that Europe is fairly strong in terms of we have a legal system that very much promotes human rights, and we have strong rulings. And so it was very interesting for me to arrive in this space and realize that some organizations were also calling for a ban, but not really clear on why they were doing so. And then also thinking, well, we have people from the European institutions that are actually really caring about the issue as well. They understood that this is a huge problem, and they want to help being kind of the messenger. And so they're reaching us and saying, okay, how can I help with the lawmaking? And so I felt just talking to these people and saying, well, apparently we're calling for a ban, and they can't really do anything with this. So the idea was really to try to push everyone a little bit to say, okay, can we be a little bit more nuanced, or at least be 100% clear why we're calling for a ban, if this is really what we all agree on. And so this is very much the context of the panel yesterday, and yeah, what came out of it. So we had the person that was leading the investigation of the European Parliament into use of spyware by member states, because in 2019 you had this huge scandal that was started by Amnesty International and Forbidden Stories, investigative journalists. And then as a result, the European Union, the Parliament, they said, okay, there needs to be an understanding of what on earth is happening. And so this was called the PEGA committee. And so you had a rapporteur, which really was the lead of this investigation that spanned over several years. I think it ended in 2023. So the lead of that initiative was on the panel. And so they came up with a lot of recommendations, extremely strong recommendations. And then, as she pointed out yesterday, none of them have been followed at the moment. And so the goal was really to take stock of that reality. And so, yeah, she said, well, you can't really call for a ban anymore because many countries are not going to agree with this. You have some fairly mature countries that have checks and balances in place that are starting to use spyware. So it's just people cannot hear you if you're calling for this. And at the same time, yeah, she recognized that none of the recommendations have been followed at the moment. So she felt that the best way to progress is litigation. So you're going after states and you sue them. And so, yeah, this is very much the initiative, and maybe I can dive a little bit further into this after, but I also want to make sure that that you express your views on this coming from a country that is outside of the EU. And
yeah, I actually also coming from somebody who isn't really an expert on the topic. Before starting this research, I didn't even think about spyware and how harmful it can be and what regulation looks like. But then when I started working with it, I understood that there's a huge problem surrounding it, and it's the absolute lack of information in open sources about what the market looks like, who takes part in, well, the market, who buys it, who sells it. And I didn't get the answer from my country as well. And I realized that this is a bigger problem than just the open source, the lack of open source data, because I believe that a lot of people in the governments, not just in Ukraine, but around the world, they are not aware of the intricacies of what spyware is, what the proliferation looks like, and the market itself, which brings me to this topic of the lack of information, because for the research that I did, I used 3 main sources, so just 3. It was the Atlantic Council report, it was the Google Tag report, the PAGA committee, and then there's also this interactive data set that is Surveillance Watch, I believe, which kind of helped you map what the spyware market looks like, but it's more about surveillance instead of just like the spyware and malware. And then there was a report that was published after I published my study. It was about why is it difficult to actually rein in spyware. It was by Lina Rike. So that got me wondering, who actually holds the information? Is there a bigger picture for at least somebody in the governments? Because obviously if most of the initiatives were started by the governments, it leads me to believe that they actually know what it looks like. They actually have the bigger picture, and specifically if it's commercial spyware and it's made to be bought and sold and it's advertised, then for sure someone should know what it looks like. So the question is, why not give it to the public? Why is it so difficult to map?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question actually, because also I think you're right in saying that there's a lot of poker faces around the table, because there's a lot of government that got this data. I believe even your government has received contracts from spyware companies and they didn't sign them. So they have data. And so this is actually something that we discussed within the coalition that I helped set up, the PEGA coalition. Members said that they've actually sent some freedom of information requests in their countries to try to get a little bit more of the picture of, okay, what are we talking about? What sort of technology? What sort of data? Who gets it? Until when? Not only they never managed to get this information, but also, they will always have gotten as an answer, oh, this is national security, therefore you cannot get any information, which is very interesting because, as it happens, my research was exactly on that question, and so states are not using their right to refuse transparency properly, because the right for states to evade transparency is an exception, not a rule. And so the European Court of Human Rights has been very clear on this. You can, as a state, use the excuse of national security to not share information with the public. But you actually have to do some tests, balancing tests. Typically, you have to check whether there is a very important public interest need. You have to check whether it's important for the individuals at hand. There's a lot of things. And so what's also interesting is that these tests have been documented so that you can't even be bullshitted by the administration saying, oh, we did the test and it was not ideal, so I guess we didn't share. Okay, well, actually, you have to be accountable on you actually having done this properly, and you also have to have internal appeal system within administration so that someone else can review this and think, okay, is it fair the way they have balanced this? Anyways, I'm not going to go into details because what I found with my research, I thought it would be very interesting to dive into how this works. And I found out that they often just don't respond to the freedom of information requests, which is absolutely mad in a democratic system, but hey ho. But so just to come back to your question, there's a huge amount of information and it's not shared with the public, and actually in violation of our own laws, it's not shared with the public.
Is it shared within the states? Do they cooperate on who gets the information and how they actually acquire it and how they communicate it amongst themselves?
It's a good question. I guess probably, like there's a lot of agreements between states. So I would say probably, yeah.
So it gives me more questions that I had before that.
Welcome in the spyware world.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible? Do you think this is going to change if like the right time comes? Because I actually have seen a lot of, well, not a lot of, but a little bit of comparisons in like the regulation of spyware and the actual the problems with it, and they're being compared to the regulation that happened with nuclear weapons. So like the world is waiting for a catastrophe to happen before anything is going to be done about it. Do you think it's kind of the same with spyware, even though it's not that lethal, but still this is what I'm seeing?
So wonderful framing. That's the reason why I'm working on this. So because when I was doing my research at the Oxford Internet Institute, then I felt that there was something that I was not really understanding about this technology, because in law school, what I was taught is how it works with the laws is that the country, the public, everyone just finds that there's a problem in society, and then that's how the legislative system arrives to fix the problems, and everybody is happy and dancing around the fire. Great story. And then I worked on hacking, and I realized, hold on a second, we're talking about a technology that the state absolutely doesn't want to regulate. How does that, equate with what I was taught in school? And that's where I thought, okay, there's something here that I don't understand, and I want to research more at some point. And that's what I did when I was in Oxford. And so that's when I discovered this notion of dual-use technology, which is weapons that can be very useful for civilian use, but also have hugely potent use in military contexts. And I should say, because that's usually what people say, oh, but a knife can also be used for, Yeah, we're talking about weapons. We're talking about something that scales. And so this is where the comparison comes from. Because the dual-use the dual-use framework was started with the Wassenaar agreements. And so that was really, if my memory doesn't fail me, it's really tied to nuclear weapons. Now, to be fair, having looked at the history of this, actually, it turns out that the root of this agreement was really for the US to make sure that Europeans were not buying stuff from USSR. So that was a kind of a very Cold War, actually, tool, and not a humanist tool as we would like it to be. But yeah, so this is where it's coming from, and this is how actually it framed the way we're looking at it at Data Rights, because we chose to work on spyware, but we were actually hesitant between spyware and AI and biometrics, because these are all dual-use technologies, so technologies that we know the states are going to shy away from actually being helpful with, because the more you have something unregulated, the more you have an edge on the military field.
Aren't they all under the, well, I might be wrong, but under the umbrella of like surveillance tech? The biometrics, the spyware, the AI automated systems?
It's hard for me to answer, because a few weeks ago I was actually, one of these evenings where you're like, wait, how is surveillance defined in EU law? And it's not really defined in EU law.
Right.
I found, well, actually, I found a definition that was tied with the dual use rules. So there you go. That's the only space where they were like, wait, how do we define this? So yeah. And actually, maybe to tell you a little bit more why I thought, how is surveillance defined in EU law? I was scratching my head. Oh, hold on. Yes, I was scratching my head about hacking because I was thinking, wait, spyware. So, and this is something that we discussed yesterday. My beef with the EU potentially regulating this. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but my beef with people that should be regulating this. Is that at the moment they have zero understanding of the technology that we're talking about, to the point, like, of course nobody can be an expert in every technology. I'm a woman. This is something very important for me to point out because women, you know, but I've heard women say, well, this is the new tool of law enforcement. This is interception, and this is exactly what it's not. Because hacking tools, you can do anything with hacking tools. And this is very interesting because companies have understood this very well. If you're not framing this as just interception, law enforcement is not going to sign contracts with you. Because if you have a tool that can actually make it possible to modify evidence, then you're fucked because the evidence that you get through your investigations cannot be valid into court. And so it's there's a pitch here of these companies saying it's just for interception. It's not true. It's a technology that can be used to modify evidence. And this has happened in India where the police was talking with hackers and they infected the computers of activists. They planted fake evidence, and the day after the police raided the activists and sent the activists to prison.
Yeah, that was on the panel.
Yeah,
yesterday.
And just to say, the resources, the source of this is on the website of Data Rights. Yeah.
Great story.
And so something fairly similar happened in Europe, not to that point, but of course that's a very important example to have in mind because this is exactly why the topic of spyware is important. We're not talking about some interception stuff and it's not great. We're talking about something that actually really, like, what type of society do we want? Do we want law enforcement and intelligence services to have tools that make it possible for them to redefine what the truth is? And can define who goes to prison or not? Because, like, that's what you get when you look at the profiles. Who actually is targeted by states when they have this new toy, quote unquote, in their hands? Well, they're very often targeting journalists that are investigating corruption. So you can see how much this is, you know, it's like, okay, so is it really supposed to, like, you say it's for very serious crime, but if these are the people that you target, then there is a different narrative here.
This is exactly the point I wanted to also pick up. It's about the incentives of the market and why it is the way it is and why it is actually difficult to regulate it. Yeah. So I like to understand them as, you know, like the three horses of apocalypse, three horsemen of apocalypse. You have the vendors, so the actual private companies that sell the spyware. You have the countries that buy them, the products, and you have the host countries that have the companies in their jurisdictions. And then with the first horseman, it is very obvious what their incentives are for the companies, for the private companies who make them. It's the clients. They actually benefit from selling their product to the companies, to the governments, and this is where the disregard to human rights comes from, because you want to get as much clientele as possible, so you can even get them from jurisdictions that don't regard human rights as high as some other countries. Then we have the states that buy, and this is also pretty obvious why they buy it. So the first one is so they can have powerful tech in their countries, but some of them don't have the capacity to actually make them at home, in-house. So it's just natural that they can buy it from somewhere and they don't have to worry about producing it themselves. And then you have the states who host the companies, and this is also an interesting one, because not only does it generate jobs, but it also gives them geopolitical tokens that they can use. And one of the examples of that is when NSO Group decided not to sell Pegasus to Ukraine and Estonia because of the tensions with Russia. And well, it was
knowing that we cannot be certain that these were actually the exact reasons why Ukraine did not have NSO.
Yeah, and also spyware, commercial spyware is actually very convenient for the governments to buy, because you can have like a man in the middle to do it. So you have this plausible deniability of actually using it and of actually obtaining it, and then everything goes to shit. It's
I completely agree with this. Because of course this is something that kind of was eclipsed a little bit from the conversations that we have, which is, is it better for states to develop their own tools? We're focusing on the market at the moment because this is where it's hugely problematic. But there's also a problem with outsourcing, which is a company can always disappear, whereas a state would struggle to do so. And so it's very useful for the state to also be able to blame, a company and say, oh, I have no clue what they're doing, while the state actually has transparency obligations, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very convenient for the states. For the companies, it's interesting because a lot of people are feeling that the wind is changing in terms of them now being more and more feeling the pressure of, cases in court where they're just forced to give information and to produce transparency reports. So hopefully this is part of the changes and improvements that are happening at the moment. But yeah.
But in order for that change to happen, we need to fully influence the incentives that are going around in the market right now, because you have this, sort of a triangle of actors who benefit in different ways, but kind of in the same direction. And if we're talking about regulation, well, because obviously we're not talking about bans, I do not see how spyware can ever be banned. But if we're talking about the regulations, this is exactly what we need to influence. This specific incentives that they have. Yeah. And, well, as I mentioned before to you when we were standing just before this radio, I had a conversation a couple weeks ago. So in my research, at the end of it, I make a statement that I think that by curbing the proliferation in the way that modern governance does, they're actually going to create a market divide where you have actors on one side who are willing to follow the rules because they understand that their main buyers are going to be from jurisdictions and from states that enforce those rules. And then you're going to have another huge part of the market that absolutely disregards these rules because it's easier for them and they have other clientele in other states. So you're going to be creating two very distinct markets, one of which is going to be self-limited by the rules and regulation, and the other one who is going to be, well, flourishing, even though they don't have the access to the European market, for example. And what I said that in my work, that this is an unintentional result. And I was proven wrong by the person I was talking to, who is also an expert in the sphere, that this is very intentional. So this is not only intentional, it's actually desirable, and that it can create a bigger market that is actually self-regulated. Of course, you will still have threats from other jurisdictions. Of course, you will always have them, not even if it's like commercial spyware, because in-house productions in countries like Russia and China is already bigger than any commercial product that you can think of. But yeah, I was thinking if that's not really desirable, but is it feasible? Can we, in like 10 years' time, see a market that would look like that?
Yeah, I don't really know whether I would agree with this because, yeah, as we were discussing earlier, the reality is that NSO has very much targeted European countries because they really wanted to be able to raise the flag of, look at this, we have fairly functional democracies and they have paid for products, therefore, you know, it kind of gives us a badge of respectability. It's also very interesting because there's this movie that was done by the journalist Ronan Farrow, where he dives a little bit into this. He spoke with different people that used to work with NSO, and they're like, the prices that were practiced by NSO, depending on countries, varied like hugely. And it's interesting because it sounds like countries like democracies, fairly functional democracies, would have like much lower prices than countries in the Arabic Peninsula, for example. So they kind of framed their business model on the promise that they would manage to buy their acceptability. And so I'm saying this because then that's the reason why I'm not entirely sure I agree with you, because then if you have just like a bunch of, a group of pariah spyware makers that will sell spyware to only horrible dictatorships, like how is that business model really working? I'm not certain that they would actually find it profitable, especially because like that's also the goal of everybody working with me on these topics. The Citizen Lab, Amnesty Tech. The goal is also to make it unaffordable to develop this technology as a company. So yeah, just to put this a little bit in perspective. All right. Yeah.
Am I on? Yes. Thank you very much. I don't want to pressure too much. Do you have any closing remarks?
Do you have a closing remark, Mia?
Well, not really. I'm just really happy to be here.
It's amazing to hear.
Yeah, maybe
anything on your mind?
Maybe a closing remark would be, it's been very interesting for me to see how, and apparently this is a general observation, people that are fighting spyware these last 2-3 years, they've really come together and they're really working as a group and cross-pollinating. And so it's really interesting to also, you were talking about access to information. So this is definitely something that we're trying to kind of start to balance out a little bit and be like, well, we can also be very good at sharing information amongst ourselves. So just to really point out this will for people that recognize that we have an absolute systemic problem here to really work together as a group, and yeah, this is very exciting to watch.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mia, do you have anything else?
No.
Okay, all good. Well, thank you very much, Mia and Laurie, for enlightening us on really, spyware, and really well done discussion. You can listen to it back online when it's archived. So you're listening to Avatar FM. Thank you. I think it's worth a round of applause. And it's quite the good overlap which we can bridge now to our next talk when we talk about access to information, because we're gonna welcome two guests that are very much concerned also with the DSA, I would say. Am I not mistaken? Am I? Okay, that is great. Which are Marie Seck and Julie Luebke, who are uncovering AI chatbot harms and how to regulate them. Until then, we're going to listen to a tiny bit of music, set everything up. Stay tuned. We're going to be back in a second. Settling in for a second topic for our second content cluster, which started at 5 p.m. It's now 5:34. Hope our guests found the microphones there. Perfect. Talking to GIMIC, it's the red and the green and the yellow. Yes. Perfect. So let's start right in, I would say, without losing any time. Just going to introduce, I said this already, with me here on stage at Avatar FM are Marie Seck and Julie Luebke. Welcome. Thank you so much for making it here, taking your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm just going to introduce you two quickly, give a little bit of an abstract about what you both will talk about. So I'll start with Marie. So Marie Seck is the assistant of the Online Expression and Civic Space program at the Center for Democracy and Technology Europe. By the way, I have to add this. If there's anything on there that might be wrong, correct me directly. Okay, you can just jump in. So she supports the program's research and advocacy on key EU policy developments relating to online expression, such as the Digital Services Act, DSA, and the upcoming Digital Fairness Act, DFA. Marie is interested in the impact of big tech companies have on our everyday life and how their practices affect our human rights. As a passionate advocate for gender equality, she particularly cares about how disproportionately companies' practices affect the human rights of women and LGBTQIA+ people. Thank you for making it, Marie.
Thank you for having me. It's very weird to hear that said out loud, like read out loud. I can imagine.
So going over to Julie. A French and German national, Julie is currently based in Brussels, where they work as a digital policy consultant. Julie is passionate about the intersection of politics, technology, and society, spending most of their time thinking about how regulation can facilitate humanity's coexistence with the digital world. Prior to this, they studied for their master's degree at Leiden University in international relations and diplomacy. Julie has extensive experience in journalism and research. As a freelance journalist, they wrote about tech, European policy, and international news. Their research interests are largely focused on big tech's influence on international relations and politics, as well as the role and risks presented by AI, which also nicely leads over the topic that you both are going to be talking about, which is and has the title AI Chatbot Harms and How to Regulate Them. A much discussed topic. Well, a lot of topics that we discuss here at the CPDP are related, I would say. So reading the abstract, and then I give it away to you. From non-consensual sexualized images creation to information about self-harm, the dangers of AI chatbot use are becoming more evident. In this following session, Marie Seck and Julie Luebke will delve into January's Grok scandal and the subsequent ban on notification apps in the EU, as well as the broader discussion of how to close the chatbot regulation gap. Take it away.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, Julie, French
Hi,
and German
Marie.
national. Right, so we're here to talk about AI-generated technology-facilitated gender-based violence and the dangers chatbots pose. Do you want to start us off with where this reflection started, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. And just to clarify that I'm currently the EU policy officer at the Center for Countering Digital Hate. So that's where my perspective is coming from on this. But yeah, maybe we can start with one of the most egregious examples of AI chatbot harms, namely when earlier this year Grok introduced a one-click image editing tool that allowed users to generate sexualized deepfakes of women and girls mostly. The tool was available for a total of 11 days for all users on X and was then restricted to only paying users. So right after all of this unfolded, CCDH went about quantifying how many sexualized images were produced. And what we ended up finding was that in those 11 days, Grok generated an estimated 3 million sexualized images, including approximately 23,000 of children. A couple of days after this research was published, the European Commission announced that it was launching an investigation against X under the Digital Services Act to see whether the risks of integrating Grok onto X were properly assessed and mitigated through an ad hoc risk assessment, as X is obligated to do under Articles 34 and 35 of the DSA. we now also have a ban on nudifier apps under the AI Act and passed through the AI Omnibus. So a lot has happened in the last couple of months on this topic. So yeah, I'm curious what you think about this, Marie.
Yeah, sure. So I think the way I think about this is kind of through the EU legislation lens, primarily, not only, but because that's kind of my job. Kind of think about how different pieces of EU legislation overlap or deal with a very specific issue that is kind of a symptom of a broader issue, of course. But so for this case specifically, if we go into more details, there are kind of three main pieces of legislation we can talk about, and you've already mentioned them. There's the DSA provisions that have some provisions removing the obligation of removal of illegal content, of course, and provisions on systemic risk, as you mentioned, which very explicitly includes gender-based violence. So that basically means that platforms have to identify, assess, and mitigate risk. And here the interesting thing, I think, is that this explicitly refers to risks stemming from the use, but also the design of that platform, which, again, I think, it's not just me thinking that, it's very clear that this refers also to new features, for example, say, an AI tool that's integrated into a platform. So when it comes to specifically illegal content, we have another piece of legislation we can look at, because the DSA in and of itself the phrase is content agnostic, basically. It doesn't tell you what content is illegal, but it tells you how to deal with illegal content, you being platforms. And so the thing we're looking at is the Violence Against Women Directive, which is to be implemented by member states by June 2027, which will then criminalize very specific cases of TFGBV, which includes NCII, non-consensual intimate imagery, and including where it's AI generated. So those two kind of interlock, but I think we still have a gap that's kind of being addressed, as you said, in a nudification ban when it comes to the tools that are used to produce the content, because what I just said about the DSA, that's regulating platforms and content on platforms. But when it comes to specifically the tools, the AI Act in and of itself has kind of limited teeth when it comes to NCII. There's some rules for assessing systemic risks, but it's kind of a self-grading student situation. However, as you said, the patchwork is kind of being filled, including through the nudification app. I was wondering, so there's been so much back and forth around this nudification app ban. I think a lot of it has come from legislators wanting to do something about this Grok case and seeing the AI Omnibus as an opportunity, but there was, I think, the balance of scope and language was really delicate. We followed this along, or my colleagues did, and I think Council and Parliament reached an agreement at like 4 a.m. So what is your read on that nudification ban? What's your feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, what this whole process has shown me is that when there's political will and a lot of noise around an issue, policymakers can act against digital harms. Like it is possible. The AI Omnibus is a part of general European Commission deregulatory agenda, and I think that was very much the predominant spirit around the AI Omnibus. So when even in that environment, what happened with Grok was so shocking that policymakers still introduced a ban when, you know, we're talking about stripping away some of the provisions in the AI Act. So it's a bit of a mixed feeling. Like, it's encouraging that things can get done, but it's also a bit disheartening that it has to come all the way here for something to be done. It felt like something that definitely could have been preventable. And I think for the ban itself, I still have some questions about its feasibility and generally just curious about how it's going to be implemented. I think the provision itself says that AI systems that are placed on the market with a specific purpose of creating child sexual abuse material or to depict the intimate parts of an identifiable person are prohibited, but most of this content is also often produced by models that do a lot more than just specifically generate this, like the Groks and the ChatGPTs of the world. So when their whole purpose is not to generate this, do they still fall under the scope? And again, you were talking about the very specific language. So I'd be curious to hear a bit more about how they're going to implement this. I know they have until December. But yeah, a lot of open questions.
No, I agree. I think when it comes to the scope, especially, I think there's some additional language about how systems that don't have, I don't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of reasonable safeguards to prevent these like general purpose AI models being used to produce NCII, and I wonder what the exact like limit to reasonable is, because that's something I found really interesting talking to my colleagues who work specifically on AI, is to kind of their perspective is that to make sure this ban is enforceable, it needs to take into account that no model is like jailbreak proof. That like the perfect safeguard doesn't exist. That's kind of the essence of an LLM. So I'm really wondering how that's going to be enforced. Although I do appreciate how difficult that balance was to find between banning only apps specifically made for nudification, and as you said, that doesn't cover everything, but also I think banning any system capable of producing that imagery would have been like
unreasonable, right? I mean, it's a bit difficult.
It's a bit difficult. I feel like I personally don't think they should be able to do this, but it's the crux lies in the enforceability, I believe. Like, you cannot realistically ban every model that's capable of doing that. Another thing I found, and to be honest, I took issue with in that nudification language, you kind of mentioned the body parts. We had a conversation.
So weird to read.
We had a conversation about this earlier, but what's your read on because part of the definition needed to ban apps is defining what we consider intimate, what therefore can be non-consensual intimate imagery.
Yeah, I think, intimate can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and hard to limit that definition to a couple of body parts. It's so weird to get into the specifics in this way, but I think it's obviously important when we're talking about topics like this. But even a picture of someone in a bikini can be intimate, and you wouldn't want that to be shared. So it feels restrictive, but also oddly specific. And I think that's also where I'm looking a little bit towards the Commission to kind of come out with some sort of guidance on what this is going to look like in practice. And yeah, we haven't really heard much except that there is a ban and this is what it looks like. But in terms of, the implementation of it, it's going to be super interesting. I have a question for you on the Violence Against Women Directive. Do you think if it was already enforced, do you think it would have made a difference? And how do you think it'll kind of interact with this ban?
Would it have made a difference? I think, like, on the legal aspect of it, it could have, just because that content would have been illegal and it was going so rampant. X, I think, in no way, shape or form could have argued not knowing about it, therefore could have been held liable. I wonder if the legislation alone would have been enough to prevent it. because I think X, especially as an actor, has not proven or has done everything to show that they are not interested in complying to the best of their abilities. Yeah. So, but I think there would have been a very good argument that they would have been liable.
If it had been enforced.
If it had been enforced. I think an interesting thing to point out in this context is that one type of content, and you mentioned it at the very beginning, that is already illegal is CSAM, child sexual abuse material. Yeah. And there was some of that material in the content produced. Yeah. And I think that kind of explains why a lot of the conversation and also the investigation by the Commission has been centered around those pieces, because that's a more clear cut. Yeah.
You can easily say, like, you should have done something about this because under the DSA you're supposed to.
And this is illegal in every country in the EU.
It's not up for debate in the same way, right? So yeah, interesting. I think with many things in Brussels, it's a bit of a, well, I guess we'll see. Violence Against Women Directive 2027, and then this ban at the end of the year. So so deep fake generation is one of many of the harms of AI chatbots. At the Center for Countering Digital Hate, we've also done some other pieces of research exposing some of the harms. Last year we did a piece that showed that kids interacting with ChatGPT over 2 hours can really easily get information on self-harm and suicide, on eating disorders, on substance abuse. If they interact for a certain period of time, they can get information on all of this. We also recently did a piece trying to test whether the 10 most popular chatbots would give a 13-year-old user information on how to plan a violent attack. Okay. Yeah, and 8 in 10 of them will. Yeah, so it's...
Wasn't there this case last year as well?
Yeah.
Of a,
there was one in Finland. Okay. So a young man planned a stabbing of his 3 female classmates using ChatGPT. And I think the most famous one recently is in Canada, the school shooting in Canada, where OpenAI is being brought to court. So there's a lot of different harms related to AI chatbots, and I think the EU regulatory framework is not necessarily set up to cover them and to address these harms as they're emerging. So it's kind of interesting to see how the regulations we already have might adapt to that. I'm looking specifically at the DSA, because we know from the European Commission that they're thinking and evaluating whether to designate ChatGPT. So that would already mean some, transparency and accountability provisions, like the risk assessments and mitigation measures, as well as protecting minors on their platforms. So it's interesting and it's emerging. So how do you see
I
this?
have a question for you. Just because I think you're thinking about this much, because of CCDH's research, much more deeply than maybe I am. How do you see what do you see the DSA's potential being, which the AI Act doesn't yet bring?
Yeah.
And that.
Thanks for the question. I think, so the DSA is supposed to be a tech-neutral piece of legislation, right? It covers intermediary services, hosting providers, etc. And the hope, I think, my hope at least, is that it would be able to adapt with the technology that's emerging and with trends that we're seeing with how people are using technology. And I think increasingly chatbots have proven that they're a new type of online service. I think they don't neatly fit the either online platform definition or search engine definition. They're kind of somewhere in between, right? As an online platform, they couldn't be that because they don't disseminate content like social media does. Search engine, I mean, it kind of fits a bit more, but chatbots don't always search the internet when they're answering your questions. They also take from their training data. So I guess in an ideal world, the plan would be to have a separate category for online chatbots. So very large. You could also have very large online chatbots, for example. I think this is still a ways away. We have a DSA review next year, and I think it's a valid question to be thinking about how to adapt the legislation. But yeah, and I think a lot of the provisions in the DSA and this kind of systemic risk framework neatly applies to chatbots as they exist. I think a lot of the systemic risk we see under the DSA on online platforms are also applicable to chatbots. But yeah, some tweaks and amendments would be needed to the DSA in a future scenario, and I think it remains to be seen whether there's space for that, and also to see what the Commission decides on ChatGPT, because if and when they designate ChatGPT as a very large online search engine, could also set a precedent for regulating other standalone chatbots, because for right now they can regulate AI that is integrated into very large online platforms and search engines, but in terms of when they're separate, like in the case of ChatGPT, this decision might change things.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that decision reading. I hope we're going to get more than a short press release, because I have so many questions about the very definition of online platforms. I doubt that they would do this decision under any new category, just because of the short time.
For sure.
We don't know when they'll release a decision, but the review would take for a long time.
Still coming, yeah.
Yes, but there's so many little criterias within the DSA that kind of how would you define the user numbers of a chatbot? I mean, is there any similar way to do that than for an online platform? And also, you said that in some ways ChatGPT acts like an online search engine. I'm wondering, I don't know if you might, I mean, I don't expect you to be the Commission and tell me, but I'm wondering if we're going to be faced with a similar situation than what we had when they designated WhatsApp as a very large online platform, of only certain features of this platform being designated as such, which I found something for WhatsApp, but let that be it, which I would find really problematic for chatbot, because kind of the crux of where risk comes from is that interplay between acting like a search engine and producing language.
Yeah, for sure. I think with the user numbers, they've already reported over the 120 or 140 million
that makes sense.
In the EU. I don't know exactly how they calculate that, but I'm definitely curious to see how they do so. And yeah, in terms, I think my guess would be that they would only regulate certain of the functionalities. So they would only regulate if the chatbot is answering by searching the web, which is definitely, as you say, super problematic, because a lot of the harms are coming from the personalization and anthropomorphization of the chatbot, and acting as having a personality and giving that advice as the chatbot, rather than, oh, I've searched the web and here's what I found. It's like, I'm pretending to be your friend and I'm encouraging you to do something, because it seems like that's what I think is best as the chatbot. So it's definitely that line I think we're gonna have to find, and it's gonna be really interesting to see how we find that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one thing I find really interesting, also just starting to think about chatbots under the DSA, is how the DSA would actually fill a gap in the AI Act in bringing some, adding some responsibility to the system providers, not only to the module providers. In the case of OpenAI, that's the one
whole
and the
value
same.
Chain,
but I think just not displacing, but adding a responsibility further down the value chain.
Yeah, it makes sense to close that. I think there definitely is a gap there when you're at the lower level versus the level interacting with the user, right? That's the DSA, and I hope we see that.
Yes.
Hope we see that soon.
Thank you so much, you both. I like that closing remark very much. A lot to think about, actually, and still a lot to be done. But very, very interesting. I have a few questions, actually. We should, if you're staying, we should talk about it. Anyways, you're listening to Avatar FM here live from CPDP conference. Thanks, Marie Seck and Julie Luebke. We're moving forward to our last topic block of the day, which will be about what digital sovereignty actually means in a practice. It's called Between Dependency and Autonomy. I'm going to welcome 3 wonderful guests here at Avatar FM today. In a second actually. Until then, a little bit of music we're going to set up and hear you in a second. Guests are joining in. Welcome to Avatar FM, last content blog for today. If you're listening inside of the conference, feel free to join. So, moving on with 3 guests I have here. I can say hi to Jonathan Rutschinski from Micromata GmbH, who is working in business development for AI and data sovereignty. Then Joel Baumann from the Kunsthochschule Kassel. He's a professor for new media at the School of Art and Design Kassel. And Christian Geminn from the Research Center for Information Systems Design, ITEG, at the University of Kassel as well. So please enlighten us about your topic, which is titled Between Dependency and Autonomy, what digital sovereignty means in practice. Thank you so much for being here. Take it away.
Thank you, Thomas, for introducing us and for inviting us. And I think we'll give it to Jonathan right away.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for having us. Thanks for moderating the whole day. I think it's been very, very interesting, and we had a lot of great speakers up on the stage today. It's been a blast, so to say. So yeah, Joel contacted us, I think it was like 3 months ago, and he proposed that we together go to CPDP and talk and have this exhibition that you guys find upstairs in the first floor of Basically. Or maybe you want to say more to the exhibition before we start with the topic itself, or how it is connected?
Yeah, it's called Basically, and it's a group of students that over a long period have been researching different aspects of new media, most of the time also about questions of trust and vulnerability when using data in with systems, also with the cloud, also with artificial intelligence, and have produced their own works, very interesting works to that. And so we're kind of in the subject, but more on an artistic side.
So, in preparation for the talk, I actually had to Google, because I was like, what does it actually mean when we're talking about sovereignty? Because I think everyone has an idea that is coming to this conference of what the word means for themselves. But I was curious what Google would say me, and if you ask Google, it's giving you an AI condensed answer that is basically that sovereignty is the power to govern yourself without external interference. And I think that's an interesting definition, because when we're talking about sovereignty here on these panels and in the conference itself, it feels like there's this complete sovereignty that can be reached, which would mean that there's no external interference, given, for example, you're a corporate or NGO player. And I found that quite interesting, because the way I understood it, it's that there's always some sort of ongoing negotiation how sovereign one can actually be. And I guess that's the first point I was trying to make when we are looking at sovereignty, when we're talking, and I mean we're talking about sovereignty in praxis. When we're talking to clients, it's always kind of interesting to see how they are deciding for or against sovereignty, especially when they are already kind of affiliated with bigger, making them dependable corporations, like one of the sponsors, Microsoft, for example. And it's interesting to see, because one of the panelists said that it's better to buy than to compete, and I think that is true for many of them, that they are just actively choosing not to be sovereign, but to instead pay the price of paying with data, paying with dependency. And for this, we have quite interesting legal framework, at least in the European Union now. And maybe Christian, I'll give it over to you. Thanks for being with us here today. On how exactly, or why we are reasoned to be sovereign as a company.
Maybe before we jump into that, a quick question that relates to what you just said. How many customers approach you telling you, well, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they are offering what they call sovereign cloud. So problem solved?
I mean, I think I have a personal opinion on this. Not really, because one of the words that you hear around here a lot as well is sovereignty washing, and I think that's what many of these big cloud providers are doing, because as long as it's still with the US company, even though it's a European server, it obliges to American law, which in some circumstances means that there is direct access to the data if requested. As far as I know, maybe if I'm saying something wrong in the law department, please feel free to correct me. Yeah, so I'd say no.
And coming back to what you said about the legal framework for digital sovereignty, I mean, first of all, I think we have to understand that it's not a legal term, it's an indirect legal requirement, you could say, in certain aspects, because data protection also means to protect data from access from third parties outside of the EU, especially from intelligence services and other similar agencies. And I think that is where the roots of both the political and the legal discussion lie, the Snowden revelations that we saw now over a decade ago, and I think this aspect has been pushed a bit to the background, but we are still talking about digital sovereignty, and yet the legal requirements, I think, remain rather vague. We have a number of things that have been going on the legal side. that I think we should touch upon. The Cloud and AI Development Act is something that is supposedly forthcoming quite soon. And that will, of course, stir things up at least somewhat. Do you have any thoughts on that, this forthcoming regulation,
I mean, when you were saying that, I was thinking, has there ever been silence? Because, I mean, for as long as I've been within the topic of artificial intelligence and the implementation of artificial intelligence into SMEs and bigger corporations in Germany, I think you put it nicely yesterday when we were talking. I expressed towards you my concerns of feeling a bit overwhelmed sometimes with all the legislative jurisdictions that are going on, all the AI acts, the AI omnibus, and you put it quite nicely by saying if someone is pretending to be sound and confident with their expertise in all these legislative things, then they are fraud. And I found that quite entertaining because it resonated with me a lot, and it kind of gave way to the feeling I think many of us are feeling right now, and many of our clients are feeling that they're utterly confused and a lot overwhelmed with the regulatory things that are coming upon us or are already with us.
So is there an anticipation when it comes to the debureaucratization initiative that the European Commission is currently pushing? Do people see light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak?
I think so, yes. I spoke with my legal department the other day, and we were just talking about the AI Act in general, and now with the omnibus, some of the deadlines being pushed back, I think almost 2 years, 1.5 years, into 2027, I think, late 2027. And they were like, they were a bit sarcastic about it because we were already scrambling like for the past year to be legally sound with everything that we are doing, classifying our AI system, and consulting our clients regarding compliance with the AI Act, for example, just to then hear that we will now have like 2 years or 1.5 years more time, which is I think many people apparently needed that, but for us it came as a bit of a they weren't managed, they weren't able to cope, I guess. Yeah.
But at least it should give the responsible authorities more time to produce guidelines that will hopefully make it easier to be compliant in the end.
I think that would be great. I mean, what we are doing is usually general purpose AI, so it is in the easier part of the EU AI Act to be compliant. But nevertheless, especially in the beginning, I think it was quite the hassle. But I mean, technically, we're not here to talk about the EU AI Act, but I think over a topic that is, I mean, they're deeply intertwined. We can't talk about AI without talking about sovereignty, and we can't talk about sovereignty vice versa. The day here opened with, I have to look at the name because I'm so bad with Cecilia, and I think what we are seeing here, or what she is writing about a lot, is that AI is worsening the situation when it comes to dependency in especially cloud services. I mean, we have the big players, and there is some sort of power hierarchy that we as well are feeling, or that we are a part of, obviously, because next to my work at Micromata, I'm also doing research in society and technology studies, and I do research in how the way we're working is changing with the implementation of AI. And some things that are happening all over again, and that has been the topic in many of the panels, was that we have features that are being forced into existing products. What many people surprisingly were talking about is the Snapchat AI, which I found quite interesting, that just was there all of a sudden, I think 1.5 years ago or something, and just was basically impossible to be removed. And with this, we see some sort of friction where features are being pushed into these existing products, and you as a smaller player, if that is, as we are a software company, or you're just a classic SME that is now is having a Microsoft suite. I think that's enough. Or you're using a Google Work suite. You're suddenly confronted with AI features for which you have the responsibility to be compliant, and you have to check if these features are sound with your information security systems, yada yada yada, and that's something that many were not prepared for, I think.
But on the basis because that's an interesting point for me is, do you have an alternative in that sense? I mean, when you're on the ground and there's a young startup company, and obviously it has to rely on cloud services and this and that, is there an alternative?
To Work Suite, or?
Yeah, a totally sovereign alternative, which actually, because one of the things that Recap speaks about is that when you go into you're nearly forced to use things like Google or Microsoft because of the amount of different features that you get, or the different elements that are already pre-existent for you to quickly build up certain services in your company. And are there any solutions that you could, or is the solution actually, as you said, to use these services, albeit on servers that are, is that the solution? Or, that's what I'm, in the use case, right?
I mean, there's this amazing thing, and I'm going to let you in on a secret. It's called open source, where usually there is an alternative that you can use, and at least in the basics are usually for free, but it comes with another price, and that is usually maintenance. So, for example, we have a general purpose AI platform that we are deploying with multiple clients, and it is in a way easier if you're doing, or if you're deciding, okay, I mean, step one is having the awareness that you are in a way dependent and that you want to have a sovereign alternative, but this comes with the price of being able or having to do maintenance and having to do integration and all these different kinds of things that are so apparently seamless when we are looking, for example, at the bigger work suite that you're just using. But yes, technically you could always use an alternative, but they are paying a price that you're paying when using, for example, a Google Work Suite, or you're using a free ChatGPT account. You're paying with something different. That's your data, I guess. Yeah.
When it comes to cloud services in Germany, we've had this long discussion, and the Gaia X project, which was supposed to be the solution to all the issues that we thought we had. Can you comment on Gaia X a little bit?
With Gaia X, actually, I hadn't had so many touch points. What we did is we recently partnered with Seck, which is another German hyperscaler. They are working in the Gaia X project, as far as I know. But as always, I mean, it's great to see that these hyperscalers are coming up more and more, and that they are advancing the technology, and that they are more and more reliant. But as of right now, they are not as convenient, they are not as scalable as the established alternatives are. And I guess that's still an issue for many, and I think that's the main reason why people are and being vendor locked, that they are not switching to a sovereign solution, like, for example, Seck or the Hetzner Cloud, or Telekom is doing their thing. There's a multitude of alternatives, really, but it's about being aware that there is a problem in the first and then deciding to rework your whole cloud architecture and then moving on to migrating to somewhere else. It's a bit of a hassle, and that's many companies are just not willing to do that as of right now.
Are you aware of any concerns regarding trade secrets or similar information that is supposed to be kept confidential, or as confidential as possible? Are there people who are voicing concern that when they're moving trade secrets to US service, that this might put them into jeopardy in any way?
Could you give us an example of like how that could look hypothetically?
I mean, let's say a German company is storing trade secrets at a US cloud server, and then all of a sudden, a year later, a US company produces a product that seems to heavily rely on these trade secrets. I mean, it's a hypothetical scenario, but is that something that people seem to be afraid or aware of?
Always, yes. Actually, I think so, yes. We had a very similar discussion with multiple clients when ChatGPT launched, because they were using it for productive code and thus being very, very scared that this code might pop up at the other end in someone else's output. I guess that's comparable to what you were drawing. Yeah. That is a concern of many, but again, usually people differentiate between what am I willing to share and what can't I share because it is my business case, for example. And usually these kind of services or products are a bit better kept either by enterprise licenses or actually running locally or in any data center. That is something that we also see, yeah, I guess.
I mean, there's interesting things that you've said, and I just was thinking, where's actually my use case, right? Where's my use case as a user, where I've somehow encountered these problematics, and I think Christian can probably confirm this because we're both I'm part of the art school in Kassel, but the art school is part of the university, so we both use the same data center university and also services. And for instance, the cloud service that we had for a long time, Hessenbox, which the first version was appalling, and it was I think a self-made or open source version of some kind of a software. And so I understand that we as academics should put all the things that we do in some kind of a system that's not a Google Cloud or not Dropbox or something like that, because then we're maybe going with sensitive data into some legal areas because these servers are in a different legislation, right? Because they're suddenly in America or something. The other way around, we get services that just didn't really work and were really difficult to use. Now I think we're using Nextcloud, so that's a service that then is bought back in. I think the servers are still all in Europe or even in our data center. But there's this trade-off. There's this real trade-off because, let's be honest, it's really easier with Dropbox in that sense. So, how do you kind of confront someone who's coming up with these who needs services, is young, needs to be flexible, needs to be fast, needs to have the things? Would you then as a company say, now use these other services, these already pre-existing services like Microsoft and that, or is it a question of money, or is it a question of scale, or is it when do you go to, or is it actually the choice that they choose?
I mean, maybe that's a bit idealistic take, but if you're young and upcoming and you're just starting with whatever startup, for example, that's your chance to do it right from the beginning. Because if you're already an established player and you have IT infrastructures that are like 20 years old and rotten to the core, then it's getting a bit tricky by deciding suddenly, okay, now I'm trying to be sovereign again and I want to get out of this vendor lock that I have, for example, with Microsoft for the past 20 years. That's when things get a bit nasty usually, I guess. So I think Hessenbox is a great example. As a student, I've also used it. It is comparable to like any cloud service that you would use to share data. For those of you who are not in the Hessian state at some point, it really is a question of convenience, because we were talking a lot on this conference about regulation, and the university body in Germany is a very regulated or very prone to regulate things before they're even in action. And we had all these talks about it, for example, in the States. People are doing it differently. We're playing along, we're doing stuff, and then when there's harm, we are regulating it. And I think the universities, for example, are doing that a bit different, which then leads to having strictly regulated, thus more compliant, but also very inconvenient services like Hessenbox, I guess. And that's, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the price that you pay for being compliant and sovereign in this case. And I would always instruct students to use Hessenbox and not Dropbox, please. I think the worst that I've seen is people just sharing interview data for their master thesis via WhatsApp. That was concerning.
Are you sometimes also approached by public authorities who seek advice from you?
Yes, actually. We have contacts with schools and universities, yes, for example.
Do their requirements differ in any way from a small startup, for example?
I mean, the small startup usually isn't the type of client we're working with, because as a software company, they are either afraid of that we are stealing the business case, I guess, or just not having the money to have anyone from third coming into and assisting or consulting. I guess when we're talking about institutions, it's always a question of the price, because when you are looking at these regulated services and the wish to be extremely compliant, this obviously comes at a cost. The infrastructure needs to be built, especially, and that is usually always an issue, I guess. Yeah.
So from another thing that I found interesting, another case which I found interesting for myself, was the moment, I think, when all the tech bros suddenly appeared with Mr. Trump, and then this great monologue that Mr. Zuckerberg sent out. Everybody wanted to leave. And yesterday there was a talk about the Fediverse, and it's great, Mastodon and all these things. I heard everybody going to leave. Everybody in the art school, all my students were going to leave Instagram and WhatsApp and all these things. Some of them are on Signal now. That's the most leave I've seen, and I think it also had to do with this, it just being really complicated, and then also this idea or this fear that there's no one there on the other side, which I could imagine also being something that you when you're like building up a company, that you say, yeah, I would like to use software that's more sovereign and more open tech and open source and all these things, but what if someone stops, or people stop using it, stop developing it and all that? Am I not more secure using the big players? Because then I've got everything and I don't have to rebuild my whole infrastructure when some project doesn't go on.
Are these students aware that their data is being exploited?
I think we're all aware of that. I think that's, yeah.
Okay, because usually if you have these kind of discussions with people, it's always a question of awareness, and if people are having an actual understanding of how a free service, for example, works, because many people think that it's truly just a given gift, and they are not aware of the consequences of them being there. I mean, we had great panels about surveillance advertisement, for example, and that's just, I guess, a term that the majority of people are not familiar with. I
think we've very suddenly come to nearly the end of this panel. So, Jonathan, if you have something you want to quickly shout in the microphone.
Yeah, it's very true. We're coming to this to the end of the discussion, but also to the end of our broadcast today. But you go.
I just wanted to quickly say thank you, obviously, to Mikromata to help our students come here for this exhibition. That was a great thing, and this is a very Kassel-based talk here. But also say thank you to Christian Geminn, who came on the panel with us to discuss this. And yeah, it's great.
Thanks for making us part of this. Use open source, and feel free to talk to me about any concerns that you have regarding sovereignty, I guess. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Christian. Any final remarks from you?
Oh, Jonathan really said it perfectly.
All right, sounds amazing. I think we have there. Look, the circle closes a little bit. We've been talking about the Fediverse, about open source alternatives. Well, and now about sovereignty and cloud infrastructure. Amazing here in Avatar FM, live from the CPDP 2026. Thank you very much, Christian, Jonathan, and Joel. I think it deserves a round of applause. And that's it. You can enjoy your night. Have a great evening. That's it from Avatar FM on this beautiful Thursday. I've left my phone somewhere on the stairs where I've prepared my moderation to say goodbye to you, but I think I learned it by heart within 30 seconds. We've had a wonderful day here today. We've been covering cloud and corporate power together with Cecilia Ricap. We've also had the Project Sentiment as our guests and been listening to fascinating. I mean, it was a lot of fun and kind of also quite a good distraction from everything that's going on here, this space, and having there's some for the people listening outside. There's some Project Sentiment people also inside here right now listening. So thank you again. That was really beautiful. And after we talked about spyware, which was also very insightful. After we covered chatbots and the danger and how to regulate them, came to the conclusion it's still a long way to regulate these technologies until we have European solutions, how we ended now, about talking about sovereignty and, well, Hessian solutions, German solutions, European solutions. Let's see how we get there. Maybe we'll find an answer tomorrow on Avatar FM. We'll finish off for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure to tune in tomorrow. We'll start at 12. We'll talk about small scaling AI. We'll talk about HANA ecosystem, about data. We're going to have performances. And I'm just very much looking forward to greet you here today. If you're listening from the conference inside of our studio, come back. Have a great night. Enjoy the party. And see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.